Through the Looking Glass, Part 1, Chapter 2, A Creature at the Doorstep. With each prick of a needle, the tightening of straps around his limbs, and the smell of chemicals through the air, Shadow could feel himself dissociating more and more. Shadow wasn't sure when this happened, but he was no longer strapped onto the cold metal table. Instead, he was back to hanging from the cuffs and chains. He was so tired of being a lab experiment, tired of feeling like he had no say in his life, and tired of the pain. He just wanted to be at peace. Will he ever be at peace? As he hung alone in the sterile lab, he began to look around just to pass the time. From the corner of his eye, he noticed that the vent that he hid in before was still open. His heart almost stopped at sight. This was his chance to try and escape. At this point, he had nothing to lose. The worst his captors could do was keep him there as a lab rat, and they were already doing that. All Shadow had to do was break out of the cuffs around his wrists and crawl through the vent. But that might be easier said than done. These cuffs were tight with very little wiggle room. Shadow's face visibly fell when it dawned on him. He'd have to dislocate his thumbs, but he had to get out of here. He had to. So Shadow waited until it was clear the human inhabitants here were asleep and wouldn't bother him. By the look of the time on the clock, Shadow was sure it would be dark outside by now, which meant he could hide better if they realized he was gone before he had time to get far, far away. He took a deep breath to prepare his nerves, and with nothing to bite down on, this was all he could do. Shadow jammed his thumb on the edge of the cuff until he heard the bone split and fall out of place. The pain was shooting, but he knew he had to continue. He repeated the action and fell to the ground as his hand slid out of the cuffs. There was no time to waste. Shadow ran towards the vent and crawled inside. The space was tight, but he continued on. After a bit of crawling, Shadow found himself on the roof. The coast was clear, so he stepped out and walked towards the edge. This was it. All he had to do was jump and run. Running on adrenaline, he jumped without a second thought. That must have triggered an alarm because soon lights were on and he heard footsteps. Shadow ran towards the woods. He wasn't sure where he was heading, but any place far from here was ideal. He ran and ran and ran and ran until his feet could no longer stand it. The adrenaline was running thin, and the pain was hitting him at full force. His vision began to blur, and his feet stopped moving. Before Shadow could even try to move again, his body collapsed and he lost consciousness. The day was pretty uneventful for Wade. The only real thing to happen was Mrs. Miller getting her son's backpack stuck in a tree. Wade wasn't sure how she achieved that, but he has no room to question because he's definitely done worse things. The afternoon soon turned into night and Wade drove home, ready to get some rest. Wade walked up to the steps at his house's entrance. At the sight of something furry on his steps, he stopped. He bent down and shined his flashlight to reveal a creature similar to Sonic. The blood on the creature was alarming, and the sight pulled at his heart. There was no way he could just leave it out there. It was in pain. It was dark, and it was extremely cold. With this newfound courage, Wade carefully picked the creature up, opened the door, and placed it on his couch. Wade just stared at the creature as its chest rose and fell.
So, what next?